I'd say to your rock stars, if you're not a lead singer, you know what? Take a day and be a lead singer on your rig and sing a song and punch in and double it and try some harmonies and compress it and work on it and learn what it's like to sing a vocal and how to stack them.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is John Fields, an internationally recognized multi-platinum writer, producer, and mixer who has worked with some of the biggest names in the music industry, from rock bands like Switchfoot, Jimmy Eat World, Lifehouse, Goo Goo Dolls, and Andrew WK, to chart-dominating pop acts like Jonas Brothers, Demi Lovato, Selena Gomez, Miley Cyrus, Pink, and the Backstreet Boys, to dance and electronica artists like Har Mar Superstar, The Presets, and Cut Copy. A multi-instrumentalist virtuoso, John will quickly jump behind the drums or piano or pick up a bass or guitar to lay down a part when needed. And this ability, combined with quick decisions in the studio, makes for a super fast, efficient, and fun session. In fact, Jordan Valeriat, also a guest on the podcast, had mentioned assisting with John on a session in the past where he got to watch John in the studio and described him as seeing tracks being created at lightning speed that sounded like a finished record before they even got to mixing. John is also an in-demand co-writer, having penned songs with Dan Wilson, Nick Jonas, Selena Gomez, Australian superstar Vanessa Amorosi, and others, and occasionally he will hit the road with an artist, as he's done playing bass with Nick Jonas in The Administration, the Rembrandts, and Soul Asylum. I'm really excited to find out what we can learn about recording and producing records from John. A big shout out to Matt Mahaffey for suggesting this interview and making the introduction. Please welcome John Fields to Recording Studio Rockstars. John, are you ready to rock?
Bring it on.
Dude, thanks for being here, man. I really appreciate this. We don't have to go into it, but you had suggested that you don't do this very often, so we feel particularly special and appreciate you taking time out to talk with us.
No problem. I'm looking forward to it.
So I sort of read your own bio back to you there, but fill in some of the gaps for us and tell us more about who you are, where you came from and how you got into recording.
Well, I started off as a kid in a suburb outside of Boston. And I guess the long and short of it is that when I was about 10 or 11 years old, my uncle Steve had the biggest hit song in the world. And that song was called Funky Town, and the band was Lip Sync. And I had a piano at my house, and I used to tinker on that. And my uncle would come into town. He was from Minneapolis, and jam with me on that piano and show me chords. And, at the time we were just playing hits of the day or Beatles songs or whatever. And I just kind of caught the bug. And around that time in 1980, he had this huge hit song, and which he basically produced, wrote, and played most of the instruments on it. That really affected me. I mean, I didn't see it happen because I lived in Boston and he was in Minneapolis, but this is before the age of video. So he just had a hit song. There was no touring. It was just a one-off. And he made a great song, got signed, put it out, and it just caught fire. And that summer it was massive. It was number one, while number two was Paul McCartney, It's Coming Up. I think number three was Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2 by Pink Floyd, and then Call Me by Blondie, and Ambrosia's You're the Biggest Part of Me. Also huge songs for me, but those are some big competition. And Uncle Steve was holding him off for 4 weeks in the summer of 1980. So That really affected me, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do this. This seems like a really fun thing to spend your life on. So over the next several years, he started kind of mentoring me, and every once in a while in the mail, I would get something like a phaser pedal or a drum machine, a Yamaha. Or, it had all changed when he sent me his TIAC Porta Studio in about 1983, and I just started freaking out on that thing, and the rest is history, I guess.
Well, that's a trip. So, and now you said Funky Town, not the original Funky Town. This was
No, this is the original Funky Town.
Wow, man. Wow.
Like,
that's
Won't
incredible.
You Take Me To?
I love that tune.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece in so many ways. There's no other song like it. The form is weird. It's like major, it's minor, it's got it all. And of course it has the futuristic vocoder, which, still today is one of the biggest, when you hear that, you're like, whoa, I love that.
Yeah. And it's also sort of defines the disco sound in a way where, the kick, the snare, the bass, they're all sort of just right,
Yeah. And I could do a podcast just on that song if you want, as I do multi-tracks, and I've studied them so much. But he did play one instrument at a time. So it was a kick loop, and then the snare, and then the hi-hat, then the tambourine, and it's pretty amazing. So, and it doesn't really sound like other songs from that year. It just sounds all modern. I mean, it literally was probably the first auto-tune. I mean, that vocoder basically is auto-tune.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing, amazing influence on me. So thank you to Uncle Steve.
I apologize for not knowing already, but what was Steve's last name?
Steven Greenberg.
Steven Greenberg. Okay, great. Thank you for that. I actually never knew anything about the backstory on that song, and I love it. Well, very cool. So you get this incredible influence from within the family. You're in Boston. As a kid growing up, Boston is also a great musical center, particularly at that time. I've been gone from there. I grew up in Boston as well. I've been gone for so long that I don't really know much about what's going on in Boston now. But, the 80s were a time that we had the New Kids on the Block coming out of Boston, right? Am I mixing that up, or am I getting that right?
No, that's right. It was, I would say in my era, it was a little more new edition, new edition.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I would say Mr. Telephone Man, Candy Girl. Then you had the Cars, of course, that came out in 78.
Yeah.
And Aerosmith were there.
Yes.
And Jay Giles.
Yes, R.I.P.
Yep, just, a lot of amazing stuff. But although it was, for me, it was all about what was on the radio, and, there was no internet in those days. So you're just like being fed hit songs on, F105, if you remember that station.
Well, I remember in high school, the introduction of the classic rock station. And at least I thought it was brand new at the time. And I think it was sort of a new genre. But they were playing all this music of the 70s and all the rock stuff, all the things you're mentioning. So I feel like I grew up really loving that. And sure enough, if I'm going to go out and have fried chicken with my daughter on a weekend here, we're going to go find the place that only plays classic rock.
Nice.
But that's very cool. So talk more about what you did. I mean, how long did you stick around the Northeast before you went to your next destination to make records?
Yeah, so just in high school, I pretty much was in the basement, 4-tracking away. I eventually got a Sequential Circuits 6-track synth and started playing, literally Jump by Van Halen and Purple Rain for me were, and maybe even 1999 by Prince.
Mm-hmm.
Those two records, in terms of synth, just started like opening up my world. And because my uncle was from Minneapolis, I kind of knew about Prince pretty early. I mean, I'd been listening to the records since the first one in 78 or 79. And always wanted to get those little all those little synth sounds. And then Eddie Van Halen came out with a song that had no guitar on it. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
Jump, no guitar till the solo.
One of the first keyboard parts I ever learned.
Yeah, just unbelievable. And you're like, so, you go to, it wasn't Guitar Center in that day. You might remember it was like LaSalle Music. Mm-hmm. I think it was where I bought my synth in Waltham. And, you hear kids playing Jump, basically. It's like that. It's like Stairway to Heaven at the Guitar Center.
That's true.
Back then it was
was there
Jump.
Now, of course, if you walk into Guitar Center, it's just this cacophony of fast guitar licks going on from every direction. But was there this brief period where you'd walk into the store and it wasn't guitar licks? It was all just synth parts for a sec in the room?
It was just Lidge. It was just Jump and only Jump. That was it.
I like that. Thank you for giving us such a good quotable quote there.
But yeah, what happened is just in that basement over and over, being terrible at music, being terrible at recording, but just having this mentor, Uncle Steve. I would send him my cassettes and he'd be like, this is great. This is great. And of course, it was not great. I mean, I actually have those cassettes and trust me, they're not great at all. But he was really encouraging. And as soon as, college came around, I was like, I want to move to Minneapolis as soon as I can. And I came into a little parental interference there, as they knew that if I moved to Minneapolis, I would drop out of college and just be a musician. So they said, you need to go to college on the East Coast, where I went for 2 years. And by the end of the second year, I said, I'm going to be leaving and moving to Minneapolis. And at that point, they couldn't really fight me. So in 1988, I moved to Minneapolis and continued on with a little college and kind of drifted away from the college thing.
Yeah.
And I still never graduated. Sorry, Mom.
No, it's all right. I mean, I sort of did a similar thing, but I think you're wise to just sort of get out of it and go with the thing that you really wanted to do. I sort of stuck it out and did a full 4 years of architecture, and I've never worked a single day as an architect. So
but you have that skill set.
Yeah, right. I can still fall back on it. I think my daughter even joked about that the other day. She's like, Daddy, maybe you could still, do architectural drawings.
Awesome.
Well, so all right. So Minneapolis, and did you go straight into working in studios there and sort of spend some time there?
Yeah. My uncle had at the time a little office, like paneling, 1970s looking wood paneling office that shared a building with this luggage company. And at the time he had a Kai 12 track, which was the, like they were beta cassettes. They looked like beta cassettes, and they had 12 tracks of audio and one additional SMPTE track that you could lay down SMPTE, and then you could have 12 tracks of audio. It was great. I think it had a DBX, 12 built-in mic pre's, literally a one-piece mixing recording unit that was just amazing at the time. And I literally moved into there. He gave me the keys to this. I mean, it wasn't a studio, but it was a studio. He had a Lin 9000, a DX7 II, an Emax, a Jambox, a Mac SE, and Opcode software. And he said, learn how to use this. I'll see you later.
I've seen those Akai things. They're very cool. It's sort of like a console desk unit with a mixer, and then you just sort of lift up a little plastic lid and pop the beta cassette in there or something. Yeah,
it basically was a VCR with like a Tascam mixer attached to it.
Was it analog or digital?
It was analog, and it was, if you remember, I used to mix, before I had a DAT machine, I used to mix to Hi-Fi VCR, High VHS.
I remember that, the F1 format, F1 or something like that.
Yeah, and I think it was something similar to that, where it was, because you used to be able to record, stereo audio on a VHS, and it sounded really good. So I think it was something to do with that, and we used that for a while until... I would say in about 1991, we split an Otari MX80 and bought a 24-track machine, which is the cheapest 24-track machine you could buy at the time. And
cheap means like $10,000 or...
I think it was 30,000, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was the cheap one. I think the expensive one was like 90,000 that had auto cal.
So pause for one sec. I refer to our listeners as the rock stars lovingly, but rock stars, I want to encourage you to stop complaining about the cost of anything in the recording studio these days. It's never been more affordable.
Absolutely not. Yeah. So, absolutely, or whatever.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. Continue.
Okay. So had that, the Otari, and we bought a TAC Scorpion. That was cheap. I don't know. That was probably a couple grand. And he said, this is again, Uncle Steve saying, figure out how to wire that together. And he hooked me up with some guy in town that we were using punch blocks, because it was cheaper than buying, Mogami cable or whatever. And literally at that point, I'm just thrown into the fire here. A guy showing me how to wire. He starts me off with the first hour and he says, all right, here you go. I'll see you later. And I had to wire the whole thing. It turns out later, I didn't really know this, but I was always wondering, like, why did my overheads sound weird when they're recorded on tracks 5 and 6? And you realize because I was wiring them out of phase. I didn't even know. So, but it worked for my purposes. It was fine. But you live and learn, I guess. Yeah. But so we had those 2 units, and that really opened up we're still at the time locking to Simpty, because I was doing, at the time, the music I was kind of focusing on was, I guess at the time, modern R&B, which was like this new jack swing period. And we're talking like 91, 92. I think I had just gotten into the brand new heavies.
Oh, I love those guys. Heavy Rhyme is one of my favorite records.
Yeah, I love that. And I started, when I got to Minneapolis, I was hanging out with my uncle, and, he's 20 years older than me. So I started meeting kids around my age, and that's when I started getting in bands. And of course, because I had this studio, I could record the band. So I started recording my band and whoever else would want to come over. And I think we charged $10 an hour back then. Mm-hmm. It was called satellite tracking. And, there would be a guy with a drum machine and a keyboard want to come in and record 2 songs, and I would just do that. Or then a reggae artist would come in and trade his wares instead of $10 an hour for studio time. And it was kind of eye-opening, just all these different projects that would come in. Occasionally it'd be like a voiceover, or just it wasn't like we were advertising or booking out the studio, but just by word of mouth and learning on the fly how to quickly, record, mix, and make them happy. And but really it was about finding local bands, and that was just about being young and in a band, and you meet other bands, and you're at your gig, and the band you just opened for, you say, hey, I have a studio, you want to come over on Friday and record? And they say, of course.
Yeah.
So
what was the name of your band back then? What was your band?
The band was called Q, the letter Q.
Oh, nice. Easy to spell. I can even write that down right now.
It was, it was because my favorite Star Trek character was Q.
Oh, so awesome.
We named it after him.
Tell us a little bit about your mindset at that time. I mean, did you sort of, here you are, you got this studio, your uncle's already enough to aspire to right there, within the family, but did you sort of had outside inspirations or aspirations for what you wanted to do musically, or were you just sort of enjoying doing what you're doing and that was good enough at the time?
No, I always wanted to be Todd Rundgren. That was really the key for me, which is a player, a producer, a writer, a mixer, kind of a jack of all trades. I mean, his records to me are still the most important of any in my history. I mean, I guess I don't have to say that the Beatles were the most important band to me, but I call them the Beatle disciples because I really wasn't around for like the actual Beatles. Mm-hmm. So people who love the Beatles, like Todd Rundgren, mm-hmm. and Crowded House, for instance, Neil Finn and the Rembrandts, and just I love that, and Jellyfish, and that generation of kind of, not that Todd and Jellyfish are the same generation, but just like Beatlesque music. That's what I was kind of going in the early 90s. But I was in this super funk town, pretty much, Minneapolis, and you just can't help it but be, there's Prince in the air mm-hmm. everywhere you go in Minneapolis, every band, and there's also the Replacements and like this more rock punk scene, but all of that kind of, mixing together in my brain. It's like you'd get a band coming in that wanted to, that was just like 2 guitars, bass, and drums. And then you'd have like a full-on R&B group with horns the next day. So I was kind of, mixing up all those influences and being a Todd Rundgren freak, kind of, that was more about mixing and recording and doing it all yourself. And, his album Acapella that had come out really affected me because he sang all the parts himself, and it was amazing.
I got to see him briefly down here in Nashville years ago. He came and played a short set. It was pretty cool. I actually didn't realize that Minneapolis was such a funk town. I mean, I knew that Prince was from there, but I didn't know that Funky Town was done before that. And obviously the title of the song sort of implies that that's what's going on there too. What were some other influences? What made Minneapolis such a funk town?
Well, hard to really say exactly why it went that way. I mean, Prince was really there was Jam and Lewis. I mean, Prince basically started, and then the Time was the offshoot. Prince basically started a band for his friends from high school, and that included Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, Monty Moyer, Morris Day, Jelly Bean, and Jesse Johnson, and all of them ended up, most of them became big record producers and songwriters. Actually, all of them had hits for other people. And then Jam and Lewis started making the Janet Jackson records here and started their own studio. And it just, post Purple Rain, it just took off. And so, if you lived within 500 miles of Minneapolis, let's say you're from Iowa and you're like a up and coming, musician, you're going to move to Minneapolis.
Yeah. Wow.
So what happened was just the scene exploded, and not just in the R&B funk world, but just all of it. Just it's a big town, and there's a lot of live music here today. Even it's an easy place to live and gig a lot.
Yeah. Well, so you talk about Todd Rundgren as being who you wanted to be at the time, which is, I would say, is not necessarily funk, right? It's a little bit more of, like you said,
no, not
the Beatles disciple. But
yeah.
So were you sort of pulling away from that funk thing a little bit, or was it just not your thing and you're sort of gravitating towards the next thing? How does that go together? And I still have to think that you probably learned a ton about making funky records.
Yeah, that was just, I never let it go, and I'm still today. I mean, that's, one of my core like musical influences is basically just the Prince Minneapolis sound. Yeah. But there's lots of other things to do in music, and you have a recording studio, you're going to record whoever comes in, and you don't get to control who that is, really. You just somebody wants to book a session, you do it. And that what happened was I started, we kept upgrading the studio, and we ended up building a really nice studio in about 1992, and got an AMEC Einstein that had VCA automation with an Atari 1040 ST attached to it. And I started making demos for, indie records. I mean, sometimes demos, sometimes, indie records. And those bands started getting signed in the kind of mid 90s, some of those bands. And that turned into a producer career for me, because you're the guy that, I was just a guy in Minneapolis making the demo. Well, that band gets signed, and then that band chose me to make their record when they actually did get signed. And I was off and running at that point. So it was just kind of happened.
Were there already a lot of eyes on Minneapolis and what was going on there, so that do you feel like it made it a little easier to get noticed, or did you sort of go in pursuit of those connections, going out to LA and interacting with labels as much as possible? No,
actually, it's funny. I'm trying to think. The first like major label record I made actually was a local artist, Tina and the B-Sides, in '97, and I had made the demo. She got signed to Sire Records. She told them she wanted me to produce the record. They did not have a problem with that. They added that if we wanted, we could get someone else to mix the record. So, Tina said, "Who would you want to mix?" I said, "Well, the only one guy, Jack Joseph Puig."
Nice.
So we went out and mixed the record with him. I went to LA. That was like the first time, where I'm working in Ocean Way Studio and seeing it really done in front of my face. And that really changed me too, just kind of watching him work, being in that environment. And I realized at that point I probably should be moving out there at some point.
What was the year?
97.
Okay, all right. And what were the records that Jack was mixing right at that time that were really exciting you?
The reason I chose him was because he mixed 2 Jellyfish albums, in 90 and 92.
Right.
And I just, those are like core major records for me.
Yeah. And I mentioned Matt Mahaffey as being our mutual friend. I know that those were huge records for Matt too. He really introduced me to them.
When Matt and I met, actually we met in 97 as well. A record company guy had set us up. I think Matt was on tour with Self, landed in Minneapolis. And, Matt, obviously biggest Prince fan. So yeah. He's in Minneapolis, kind of probably freaking out, like, I'm in Minneapolis, calls me up, gets my number and says, "Hey man, I'm here playing a gig." I said, "Dude, come over to the studio when you're done. Let's cut a song," which he did. And we cut that song, Glued to the Girl, that day. And that's the day I met Matt, and I watched him work in front of me. And that really blew my mind. He also brought in that Nord lead keyboard that I had never even seen before. And that was just, eye opener. I went the next day and bought my Nord lead because of Matt.
That's great. Well, so Matt is also somebody that I know to work incredibly quickly in the studio. He just creates stuff really fast. That's how I've heard you described Let's talk about that process a little bit. What do you want to say about working quickly in the studio? How do you make records so quickly, and like, what's your mindset during that?
Well, it's morphed over the years, but really where it's at now is if you're working at my studio, my studio is set up and wired as such that I have 56 inputs available, in Pro Tools, and all the chains are already pre-set. So you want to play an acoustic guitar, that's all set. You've got a mic pre going into an EQ, going into a distressor, which could be in bypass or not. And you just open up input 13 and you're playing acoustic guitar. Same thing. You want to play a drum kit, you just open up these 9 tracks and it's ready to go. I've already dialed all the sounds. So there's no waiting. You're not waiting to like, hey, I've been in sessions where it's like, let's try a U47 on the upper tom. And, the assistant goes to the mic closet, comes out. It's like, got to warm it up, got to set it up. And just like, screw that. I want it all set up fast. And so that I can work on the music and not work on the tech part. So really for me, it's about having your chains set and ready and being prepared for whatever might happen. Obviously, if you have a horn band coming in, you got to have your horn set up, ready to go. And that includes headphones and, routing for and labeling the headphone boxes and all of that, making it so that it's just so fast so that nobody is waiting around for any technical thing. Mm-hmm. So, obviously the only thing that, you crash a couple times a day and that's a nice rest. But, we used to rewind the tape deck and have that same rest. But, so working fast, that's the thing, is having the chains and then just, committing to your musical ideas fast.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Have you ever given that same advice to somebody who's always recording? Well, I imagine you're playing a lot of music yourself too, but this same being set up always works for even if a band walks in to just record with you and they've got their own kind of thing going on. Do you just sort of adjust your setup slightly for them?
Yeah. A lot of the times now it's like, bands are usually from out of town, so they're not bringing their drum kit. Mm-hmm. They might, the kick, the drummer might bring his kick pedal. And his sticks, but I've got a really great collection of kind of all instruments and know what is going to work for that band. Sometimes if I work out of town, sometimes I go to Nashville or somewhere else, London, and record. Obviously, we have to use the gear that they have. And usually I spend the first half a day setting up the studio to be like mine, which is, just everything's up and ready. And I don't even have the band there. Like you guys show up later. And I set it all up first. So that's part of working fast. But I think the other side is really about, just being quick at your, at Pro Tools and with your musical ideas and like comping and just all of it. And I think that's just a testament to like doing it every day for a long time. You just get fast. Okay.
So that brings up 2 things I want to say. One is, Matt also had similar suggestions. He says, his tip for Pro Tools was use templates, like pull it up where a lot of things that you do and do repeatedly are already ready to go and set up. So nobody even is waiting for you to set up your Pro Tools session, despite how fast you are. And then my next question for you is, you're talking about developing skill sets with your tools, right? Like Pro Tools, you know how to work really quickly in it without thinking about it. What about switching and trying new stuff? How often are you tempted to switch and try out this new DAW, this new DAW, or some new system? Or have you decided, it's more important for me to be fast at this? I don't even care if that new thing that just came along has all these features. My feature of being fast at what I know is more valuable.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I would love to switch to something else if there was something else as good. Obviously, you work with a lot of kids now who are using Logic, and I'm just blown away by the tones they're getting and the internal synths and all that. And I do have Logic, and it's behind, I have it on my desktop because every once in a while a band brings in a song. You need to open up the demo and pull in something off the demo. So I know the basics. But man, you start trying to get in there and edit a snare drum, and it's just like, what tool do I use? It's totally frustrating. So, and then, the other one is Ableton Live that I'm starting to see a lot of people use. And this audio to MIDI feature, which is really intriguing to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You can do a beatbox and it'll just create a little mini drum set out of it.
and it knows kick and snare and hi-hat. It's crazy. So, I mean, that at that point, that's like, put in your sample or the record that you want to, copy from the 60s, and then just get MIDI and then point it to like your own sounds and just, go from there. So I'm interested in that, but I just don't think I have the time. I feel like to get good at Logic or get good at Ableton Live, I'd need like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, a year maybe.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say another 20 years.
Yeah, maybe, but I'm jealous of people who can do that. I mean, I also cannot read music, and that's the same thing when I see like a cello player come in and just rip a song that he's never even heard before. Amazingly, and
by
with
reading
a feeling,
music, yeah.
And it's like he's reading music, and I'm just like, this is insane. How come I cannot learn that? And it's maybe it's just old dog, new tricks, but it's never going to happen.
I know same thing with Matt Mahaffey. Matt also never, he doesn't get into the music reading or the theory so much, but he'll sit at a piano and play this incredible stuff.
I will always remember Matt. We were doing a session. I was producing a Mandy Moore album, and I brought over Matt to play keyboards on it. And we were at this really cool vintage studio, and they had all this cool gear. And I think it was like some weird Roland synth that we pulled out from the early 80s. And Matt just starts jamming on it. And I'm like, what's up with that? I mean, it's a great part you just came up with. He says, he says, it's kind of like typing, he said. It's like, I just find the key and I type. That always was intriguing.
Well, all right. Well, that's encouraging. I mean, I like the fact that you're intrigued by new stuff and what it might be able to do, but you don't doubt yourself in terms of if you've got a skill set and you've got abilities on tools, you don't necessarily keep feeling like you need to switch your tool set out. Just have it ready. No. And I really like that advice about having the studio set up to go. I have always run my studio a little differently here in Nashville because I have different kind of sessions coming in. It's a small studio. And so I sort of have this zero the studio out mentality and set it up every time. But I liked hearing you talk about come to Nashville and just set it up the day before. So that's always been my thought is like, hey, I want to know what the tracking is tomorrow and set it up tonight,
Yeah, if you share your studio in any way, you can't do it this way, or you have to agree on a setup. So, I don't even have a patch bay. I just have, if I need to change out a mic pre on a snare drum, I literally have to like go behind the racks and change the XLR to a different pre. And so, you tend to not change your stuff, but over the years you learn what you like, and you're never going to change that snare chain. I mean, are you really?
Well, and it's kind of nice because your system is like, if you dial in a sound, why should I have to refigure it out again tomorrow and the next day? Just like keep tweaking it.
And the records do, and you could argue that, but all your stuff sounds the same. But that's not true. It's really about the musicians that are playing on it, and the song and everything. So it could be the same drum set the next day, like literally the same dead Ludwig toms, but they work. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're used to the idea that our computer will start up and look like it did yesterday. So why should our studio not necessarily start up and look like it sounded?
I mean, you could almost say that the entire studio is a template, for making music.
Right. And I like your philosophy of saying, like, what would you rather be doing? Plugging in, hooking up words and phrases like conjunction, junction every morning, or getting down and making some music.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about your process. You mentioned working with Paul David to me, and you said that you guys had really come up with this important process of sort of mixing a song as you create it and handing it back and forth. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so up until 2008, I'd been working mostly mixing my own records, unless there was a request or unless the artist and I decided we wanted to have an outside mixer, like somebody like Clear Mountain or Chris Lord-Alge or JJP or Mike Shipley or somebody like that. But, I had to do it myself a lot of times, and I was pretty confident about that. And my buddy from down in Nashville named Will Owsley kept telling me, he's like, you got to meet my friend Paul Hager. He's amazing. And, it just turned out that we were in the same studio one day. Paul pops his head in and he's like, hey man, what's up? And so we had lunch and I talked to him about maybe doing something together. And he had a little studio. He still has the same spot in Burbank. And he was very into outboard gear and SSLs, and he's an amazing mix engineer.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have time for SSLs and really budget to book mix day sessions at an SSL. And then if you need a recall, that kind of was over for me by then. And I said, Paul, if we're going to work together, we're going to need to be 100% in the box, and we're going to need to have identical Pro Tools setups down to the plugins. And he said, well, let me try it. So I gave him a song, he mixed it, and the way that works is I will finish a song. Let's say I work for a day or two on a song with a band, and let's just say it's a one-song project. So we track it the first day, come in the next day, kind of clean it up, keep tweaking the mix, and everybody's happy with it. And then at that point, I will, 9 times out of 10, I will send it off to Paul, and in a hightail document, I'll zip the session with all my plugins, with all my master bus chain, everything's on there. Sometimes even some live auto tunes are even on there.
Mm-hmm.
And he will grab it sometimes the next, in the perfect world, he does it the next morning, which I love. And he double clicks that zip file. Next thing you know, he's working on the song. He immediately dives in, fixes the phasing problems on the drums, adds new samples, cleans up everything, cleans up breaths and vocals, and sometimes will radically change things, just does what he feels. And he will send me back an MP3, and I listen to it, and I say, this is great, but the hi-hat seems a little loud, or the bass is weird. Can you go back to what I had before? And he will then send me that fresh Pro Tools document with additional audio files attached. So it'll be like a zip document with, the name of the song, Pro Tools document, and maybe 8 audio files. And you look at what they are, and it'll be like some audio suite stuff that he had,
processed or something, right? So he's not sending you the full session back.
No, because I've already got that data. So literally I will take those 8 files, slam them in the audio folder, double click his session, and I'm now seeing and hearing a completely cleaned up, amazing sounding song that I was kind of done with yesterday, and now it's even better. So that was how we started that in 2008. I think the first full record we did that way was the Jonas Brothers' third record, Lines, Vines, and Trying Times, in I think it was 2008. And ever since then, we've been doing everything together. So it's a really cool process. If you have someone that you trust and have someone that has your same gear, it's cool to be able to just either you're collaborating, but you're not together. And a lot of the times Paul would be on the road because he tours front of house with some big acts. So he would be in a hotel in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'd say, Paul, can you please open this song and just put in an hour? And, he'd log on to the hotel internet and literally on a pair of headphones or these little Bose travel speakers that he has, fix up my drums and make them better. And, to be honest, I don't care where he's doing it. As long as he's doing it, I'm happy.
That's great. I like that testament to working with good people over, good gear. But also, I'm going to rewind a tiny bit and geek out on a detail. So Rockstars, what John's talking about is Paul would send him a zip file that just has the session that Paul did, and it's only got the additional audio bits that John didn't originally have because Paul added them. And then John talked about taking those audio files, putting them back into his own audio files folder for that session, take that session that Paul sent, drag that into your session folder, and then when you open it, Pro Tools will sort of find your files and find John's files and have the session back together. So I just wanted to clarify that detail to help people.
Yep.
Well, that's awesome, man. Let me ask you this. When you guys are handing sessions back and forth, do sessions become bloated? Do they start to get too many plugins on them? What do you do to sort of simplify it and keep consolidating? Or maybe that's what you do. But how do you handle sessions getting bloated so that you can do all this work and then commit to things and have your computer freed up to keep moving forward?
It's a lot of the times Paul will send a vocal through an 1176. He has an amazing set of outboard gear. So, and that's just committing and, Pro Tools commit or just, bouncing to an audio. And then he will leave the track that it came from, inactive right above it. and not hidden, so I can see that he kind of printed that track. If we need to go backwards, we can go backwards. A lot of the times, we've run into problems where I will send him a track. It has a couple live auto tunes on them. He opens it up. He's like, this auto tune's all weird. Why? And I say, what version are you on? And he's 0.0. And I said, oh, you need to do the upgrade. I'm on 8.1. So one issue is you do need to keep up on all your plugin, updates so that you don't run into issues like that. But, Bloated, not really. I mean, he does add a bunch of stuff. He also takes off a bunch of my stuff. He doesn't like what I've got. He'll change the bass chain. And if, in fact, it gets to a point where I can't open the session because, Ozone 7 is taking up too much and all of a sudden I can't even hit play, I will just print some tracks or I'll ask him. I mean, we've even done stuff like, he'll take the entire drum kit, 15 tracks of drums through a bunch of subgroups, and he will just print it as a stereo audio file and then make inactive that 15 tracks with 100 plugins on it so that it's just easier to work with. And if we ever have to reverse engineer, we just, go back, open up those drums and turn up the hi-hat if we need to. So we've got workarounds for the bloating thing.
Yeah, and if you wanted to edit that stereo file, do you keep it grouped with the individual disabled tracks and just sort of edit them as a group sometimes?
No, you don't. You don't edit the two mix of yes, that can be trouble.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good.
No, you got to go back and, unless you know for sure that you will never need to, change that drum arrangement.
Well, let's talk about drums for a sec. Drums is a particularly challenging instrument for people to record in the studio, I think, and it's probably because it's a whole collection of instruments. It's the most mics we use on anything usually.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about, you when I listened to your playlist, you had a lot of productions with very tight sounds, and then you have some with sort of live rock drum sounds. What's the difference between recording tight drums, live drums? How do you approach those differently? And also tell us about your studio that you work at a lot and what the drum room is like that you're recording in.
Okay, well, I think I just have a taste for crisp, tight drums in general. I mean, and that comes down to the actual drums and how they're tuned and treated. So I'm not really that into live open toms that go doy, doy,
right.
like no, you might think it's cool at the gig, but man, nothing like a floor tom that goes on for 7 seconds to really kill your session. Then you're like putting pillows under the floor tom. And so I have, worked on my drums. I have several drum kits. A shout out to Sugar Percussion because I love my new Sugar drum kit that I've had for a couple of years. Amazing drums, in particular the snare drum. And I've got a rack of snares and a Ludwig Dead kit and a little Questlove Breakbeats kit for, smaller, jazzier tones. I've got, vintage Rogers. I have some new stuff as well. And they're all set up with, the kind of heads that I like and the right moon gels and duct tape. And some of them look like, I've had the same, I've got like a Don Henley Dead snare, I call it. That's like, the Eagles,
Right.
I can name you the songs that it's on. And I've never changed the head in like 15 years. And you're not allowed to touch that drum in any technical way other than hit it. And it just does this particular thing that nothing else does. And, so I've got, over the years, I've worked on getting a setup where, depending on the song, you just pull out, you're like, I know I need a tangy Ludwig metal sound on this one. So there's the drums themselves and the cymbals. And then there's the mics, which are, nothing special. I got what everybody else has. 57s, D12, Coles on the overheads, a stereo Telefunken on the room. But I really don't care that much about those mics because it's funny, when I go to other studios, my drums always end up sounding the same. It's like when I go to another city and work on drums, it's weird. It's like something in me gravitates towards this certain sound. And so there's that. And then in my studio now in Minneapolis, it's called Creation. It's a old studio. It's a 100-year-old building that used to be a vaudeville theater. And it's been a recording studio since about the 50s when Bruce Swedian turned it into one. He's from Minnesota.
Wow.
And he's basically built this as a recording studio. There's there's 3 rooms in the building, but I have the smaller studio, which is a really dead, it was built, this was remodeled in 1984. And at that time it was all about dead. So it's super there's the room mics almost do nothing. It's kind of frustrating actually.
Yeah.
But I have workarounds for that. I have an adjacent basement with concrete walls. So I put a mic down there and I can get some ambience down there. But right now it's really dead, and you can get some really, really dead, great focused tones here.
Let me ask you this. I mean, you may have already answered it because you talked about going to different places and gravitating towards the same drum sound. But do you feel like your path in recording in different spaces has been one where you're sort of visualizing, where you're trying to take sounds and everything you learn about recording takes you there? Or do you feel like you've accepted that each space you're in just has its own thing and you just sort of try and learn what that thing is for that space and just embrace it around production?
Yeah, because a lot of the times you're not in an optimal space. Like I worked a lot in this, there's a guy named Ducky Carlisle who you should interview in Boston, who's this amazing producer engineer who has a studio in his house. And the living room is one of the best drum sounds I've ever heard. And, the control room is the basement. The living room with a nice, vintage wood floor is just fantastic. And sometimes you got to work in a studio like that. That's not, there's no runners. It's not the record plant. I like to call them like bong water basement studios because it's just, you gotta work with what you got. Don't use channel 11.
Rock stars, don't drink the bong water. Don't drink the bong water.
Yeah, exactly. The classic is, where it's always in the third tier town. Like, I don't know, I'm not going to name names, but, let's just say there's a studio in the middle of Nebraska or something.
Right.
And the guy's got a U-47. He's like, I traded in all my stuff for this U-47 and I had this local guy fix it. And then of course you pull it up and it sounds like absolute shit. And you're like, dude, did you know that there's something wrong with this mic? He's like, oh, it's a U-47 though. Yep, but it's bad. Let's pull it. Do you have a Shure? What's the new mic you have? I'll even take a Audio Technica 4033 because at least I know it's going to work.
Right.
So there's that. Yeah,
it's kind of or the studio you work in where they've got a tape machine and you're like, okay, can we align it? And they're like, well, we usually just have somebody come every few years and align the machine.
Exactly. I remember one studio I went to, I was going to do drums and the assistant, and I told him what I wanted. I said, I want, D12, 57s around, blah, blah, blah. And I get there and the setup has been done for me, except he has inserted EQs and compressors on every track, outboard. And I just can we please just take all those out? So he thought that was what I was going to want. But in fact, I don't want any compressors on any drums.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So that's sort of something I learned working with Steve Albini, is he would cut drums that sounded great and we weren't using compression, maybe on the room mics, but that was it, And again, I thought that, you should cut it through a distressor, your snare, and slam it. It'll sound awesome, And then you get to mix and you can't do anything with the drums. Talk about why you don't cut with compression or EQ on the drums.
Well, as a guy who mixes other people's projects all the time, you get it's nothing like that kick drum that comes in that has more snare in it than the kick. And, how does this happen? Was the mic 10 feet away or what's going on? No, it turns out we had a distressor on the kick because it makes it great. Well, I just learned over the years. I was like everyone else. At first, I was like, oh my God, we're going to compress the room mics. It's going to sound like Led Zeppelin, And of course, there's no turning back at that point. So I learned and the safest way to work is to have no compression on anything. Honestly, the only thing I compress right now in my current setup is vocals and maybe an acoustic guitar.
Nice. I discovered this the hard way. Doing live sound for a friend, I was trying to make the vocals sound like I would in the studio with compression and make them hot. But then I could never feed them back into the monitors because they would feed back on stage, and I realized that wasn't going to work. And I've also set up a session for vocals for somebody else to come in and sing, and I start dialing it in the way I think it's going to work for me in the control room. But then I go put on the headphones and sing into the mic. And I've realized that sometimes it sucks to have compression on your vocal in the headphones. Have you run into that? And have you found that for a vocalist, they prefer to have no compression where you've got all this dynamic range going into the headphones? Or is that just bullshit?
Not really. I mean, honestly, the opposite. I've had people want more. So on my input channel for vocal, I've got a couple plugins, DSP style plugins inserted that are ready to go in bypass, but it's like a channel strip with some compressor on it, some compression on it, and reverb, like a mono deverb plate at like 2.5 seconds or whatever. Just so if they say, can you put a little sauce on this? You're just like, bam, it's on.
And it's on the track, on their vocal
on that track, on the singing, on the input of that vocal. And same with the compressor. Sometimes they're like, start singing quiet, but you don't want to jack up your mic pre. But you want them to hear better. I mean, we also can have feedback I've had feedback on headphones. That's how loud
me too.
Some of these people listen to their stuff. But no, so honestly, I've never had a request for less compression on a vocal.
Okay, but I like the same mentality, which is maybe what I'm recording doesn't have to be the exact same thing as what they're hearing in the headphones. Maybe they can hear something that works for them, and I can hear something in the control room that's going to work for me for the record. So that's a great answer.
Right. Other than that, we are both listening. I mean, in my world, I listen to exactly what they're hearing.
Right.
So we wouldn't be able to turn off the reverb for me. But yeah, temporarily, I don't mind listening to reverb while we're tracking a vocal.
Yeah, dig it. I like that. That's a great tip. What else do we want to talk about in terms of vocals? I don't even know what to ask. Just tell me something I don't know about recording vocals.
Oh, God. So, I mean, for me, that's the core of producing records is the vocal, everything. It's like, drums, kick drums, all that. It just doesn't matter unless you have the vocals right. So, if I had advice for anyone, it's figure out how to coax amazing vocals out of a singer. And, that means singing stuff to them and saying, sing this, or here's an ad lib idea, or this is the harmony that you need to sing. I mean, to me, that's really what separates great producers from not so great producers, is maybe how to work the vocals. And that, I don't know if that means, I'd say to your rock stars, if you're not a lead singer, you know what? Take a day and be a lead singer on your rig and sing a song and punch in and double it and try some harmonies and compress it and work on it and learn what it's like to sing a vocal and how to stack them and learn about, like, when you see and hear rushing vocals. I mean, nothing worse than rushing. You got to move those. You got to learn how to nudge vocals back. And, when you have 8 harmonies backing up the lead vocal, you got to look in there and see, why are those Ks all like, what's going on with that? You got to learn how to fix that. Sometimes you got to erase some. Sometimes you got to, crossfade into the, sometimes, I've had to sing in my own breath because the singer was gone and I need a breath before the second word.
Interesting.
So,
leave the S's off the double too, right? No need. You don't have to put S in there.
Yeah. Sometimes, unless they're feeling good, if they're feeling good, you don't touch it. But if you have like 16 S's, you're definitely going to, use just a couple. And then when they're panned out, listen on headphones too, when you're mixing, to make sure that some weird S is not on the left side that you don't realize.
Yeah.
So, just focus on the vocal production, I guess.
Doubling vocals. What are some things that are going to cause problems for the singer when you're doubling? Do you keep them both panned to the center? Do you find that it's helpful to pan one off to the side so they can separate their own voice from the one they're doubling to? Any tricks about that?
Yeah, that's up to the singer pretty much. I've found that I'd say 50% like it in there. On, some are say, pan it left and put me right, or something, and then, honestly, I just made a record this last month with a guy from England who is deaf in his right ear. So he only has one ear. And you got to think in mono for this guy. When he listens to a mix, he listens twice, once on one earbud and then again on the second earbud. And he'll make you comments and say, hey, that delay, it's only on the right side. I heard it on the second pass, So you just got to be ready for whatever the singer wants. And, I imagine when the Beatles were doing it, I think it was in there and they were just kind of doubling. But again, tell your singer, take one ear off. There's no better cure for pitchy vocals than taking an ear off.
Yeah. Have you ever had somebody be pitchy with an ear off and then they put the other ear back on and all of a sudden they're singing great?
Absolutely. So in that case, go with it. But yeah, it's always peculiar to me when that happens.
That's very cool. Have you worked with Max Martin?
That's
yes. Somebody that you work with.
I have.
I just sort of recall hearing similar stories about him being very specific about what a vocal part should be and really, really guiding somebody in the studio like that. And I just like that idea. Sometimes first we overproduce when we start out and we have to learn to back off. And then we have to learn how to get back in the game again, it seems like, and really not be afraid to tell people what we might need to suggest for a musical part, a vocal part, even an instrumental part, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to be open with your artist and who you're working with. And that's about just trust. And I mean, it's not like, you walk into, I've had younger bands come in and they're just like, whatever you say. But I don't want that. I want a collaboration between everyone in the room. There's no like, producer, you do it my way or that's it. There's none of that going on with me. It's pretty much everyone's got an even say about what we're doing. And we're just, working towards a goal of getting the greatest song and recording of that song as we can. So I like when drummers are sitting around in the control room all day. That doesn't bother me. Some people like to clear out the control room. And I like having the bass player in back, even though he has no bass tracks today. Every once in a while, he will say, some guy will just, yell from the back of the room, hey, what if that was twice as long or something like that, and all of a sudden your song just got better.
Yeah.
And it's because they're invested in the project and they really want the best. And, so collaborating and musical part wise, it's just really, if you have an idea, please say it.
All right. Now, are you also advising new interns to chime in like that on day one of the session?
Of course not. But, I have had interns whisper to me. I mean, I've had a few assistants over the years, and they'll, if you get comfortable,
yeah,
and they're comfortable, you can tell if the band is going to be cool with saying, "Hey, that snare sounds off," or something. I don't really have a problem with it unless they start spouting, weird ideas and concepts, or maybe doubting, anyone's idea. No, that's not a good idea. Yeah, you shouldn't be saying that if you're an assistant.
Right.
But if you're in the band and you're making that record with me, I want to hear from you. Yeah. I want to know what you think, why you think that's better, and let's just do it.
I like your suggestion of what an assistant or an intern might do to really be helpful, which is to whisper in your ear, at an appropriate time if they're hearing something. Hopefully we're working with interns and assistants that are great and have great ears and great ideas. And so, if they think they notice something that you might not have noticed, they're just going to lean in and try and be helpful to you as the engineer producer.
Yeah, I've gotten a text from my assistant here and there.
That's great. The channel is off, by the way. All right, so let's see. What did I want to ask you? Last question, then we'll take a break and come in for the jam session. Talking about drummers, I was surfing around your YouTube channel, and you had this great video of a drummer named Michael Bland. And it was pretty incredible to watch. Can you talk about who he is and what it's like working with him as a drummer?
Michael is just a force of nature. He's one of my best buds. I met him in the early 90s in Minneapolis. At the time, he was playing with Prince. You might have heard him his biggest Prince songs are Sexy MF, Diamonds and Pearls, and Cream. And he's in those videos, so you'll see him. But what many people don't know about Michael is that he has perfect pitch, that he has a full-on encyclopedic knowledge of all pop music.
Wow.
Just everything, all the genres, and can tell you what that chord is on piano or, what the harmony is supposed to be. And he's just really, really a full-on muso. Like one of the top musos I've ever met in my life. So I would bring him in on sessions a lot to play drums. Not only is it impressive to have, Prince's drummer, or, I think he's played with Maxwell and Shaka Khan, and he's currently in Soul Asylum. And I've made 3 albums with Soul Asylum with Michael. So we've done a lot of studio time together. And we just have a great working relationship about working fast. And, he's really great because he'll come in and just like any great session drummer, you hear the song once, you talk about what the vibe should be, and you go do it. And two takes later, it's done, and it's amazing. So I would bring him in on sessions sometimes I don't even know what the idea should be, what the drums should play, and he will always have that for you. So not only is he creative, he also can mimic a programmed part, down to the ghost notes. So it's really cool to have him around. And then he'll sing some background vocals and play some keyboards on it too, which is always a great bonus.
That's cool. Rockstars, I'll try to include a link to this video I was talking about in the show notes. But this was, I think, a Jonas Brothers session. And we're just shooting a video of him playing down a take. And maybe it was the second take already. But what was remarkable to me was here I'm watching this guy, and the drum part was so simple. And it was so precisely exactly right on. He did not play a single wrong note in the entire song. It was just like,
he has a really great, short-term memory is the greatest skill of a session musician, is remembering that the second time we go twice, the third time we stop four, the fourth time we end on the end.
Right.
You got to remember that stuff, especially, down in Nashville, those guys are excellent at remembering when the peculiar little doubles and so forth are. So
we also cheat. We write it out on a piece of paper and call it a chart.
I know, but I just did a session. One of my favorite guys down there is Ilya Toshinsky, and man, is that guy just a musical powerhouse. But man, his short-term memory is so insane. You play a banjo part and then you double it with a mandolin part, and it just interweaves perfectly. And it's just like, how do you remember that? It's the same chords as the song Yesterday you did at a different studio, but it's a new, fresh part. That's
great. Well, another thing that I watched Michael do, which I thought was cool, is he sort of like perfectly evolved the drum fills. It's like, it wasn't too much at the beginning and it wasn't too little, 2/3 of the way into the song. And that's something.
Each chorus.
Yeah.
Each chorus you would, the first chorus, no fill. Second chorus, a little fill. Third chorus, bigger fill. He's very thoughtful like that.
So what about fills? One thing that I feel like I've finally understood is that maybe people don't understand initially is that drum fills, to me, are all about the vocal. They're like
I've never thought about it like that. There's this amazing YouTube video of this guy down in Nashville that analyzes all the drum fills. I'll send you a link. It's amazing.
Cool.
Cool. Everyone talks about the Pat Boone, Debbie Boone,
right,
or the Motown fill.
Bucket of beans.
Yeah. So you just, what fill should you play? I usually just have an idea of like, this is what it should be. And I play drums myself, so I will do it a lot of times, or I'll program it in or request, by the session drummer to play this way. I guess that's another, thing to learn if you're an, up and coming producer is, sit down to the drums and learn how to play them. At least figure out how to play a beat and figure out what you're talking about when you make suggestions to someone. And that will help loads when you're working with, random drummers over the years.
Yeah, I think when you're working on songwriter stuff, if you can understand the kick, the snare, the guitar, acoustic guitar strum, and the vocal, you're most of the way there.
Totally. Agreed.
All right, cool. Well, Rockstars, we're going to take a break for a sec. We'll come back in for the jam session. You can find links to everything we're talking about in the show notes, which will just be right on your listening device. If you're on your iPhone, go into the podcast app and there should be stuff to click through, including the YouTube links right there. And we will see you guys in just a moment for the jam session. Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks, and you get downloadable multi-tracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum drum kit, bass, and guitar is recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record, Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, rock stars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Hey, rock stars. We're back now for the jam session. My guest today is John Fields, joining us from Minneapolis. Is that where you are right now, John?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And we're going to jump in and jam. You ready to jam, dude?
I'm ready.
All right, cool, man. When you started out in recording, what was holding you back?
It's probably that I sucked at music. Like, terrible musician in high school. And so it was hard to, you're recording yourself, so your music is not that great. But I guess that would be, if there was something holding me back, it was that. But, I learned over the years how to be better.
So you already had a taste for music at that point. You just didn't know how to put it together yourself?
Yeah, I'm listening to the Doobie Brothers and analyzing, hey, there's a string line that comes in on the third verse of What a Fool Believes. What is that? But never really could, at that point, could not really play the song. So I learned.
That's great, man. Well, obviously you do a great job of it now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So how about some of the best advice you received?
When I started mixing in the early 90s, my Uncle Steve would come over. I'd get the mix up on the board, and he'd come in and critique the mix. And he'd say, remember this one thing he'd say, if you want to hear it, make it hurt. Which I still, to this day, in other words, put a point in the mid-range on it and, turn it up. Like, there's nothing I have an issue with, working all day on this amazing part and then turning it down so you can't hear it.
Yep.
It's like, if you do something great, turn it up.
Roger Moutinho, another great producer here, had given me advice similar to that once, where he said every time he tried to perfectly balance everything, he'd end up with a shitty mix that had no depth. And that the best way to do it is if you're gonna turn it up or down, do like at least 2 dB, something like that. And make a bold move, and your mix will end up with more depth.
Definitely.
So that's cool. Tell us Steve's full name one more time for listeners so that they can we can really write it down. Steven
Greenberg. The band is Lips Inc. Lipps Inc.
Awesome, man. So now how about sharing with the rock stars a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something that they could use on their next session today?
Let's see. One thing that I could suggest is don't save it for tomorrow, whatever it might be. If it's comping the vocal, comp that vocal while you're sitting there with the singer in the booth. I mean, that's how I do it. Mm-hmm. Like, decide with your singer that the first verse is great, we're moving on. Not like, hey, later I'm going to go through this 16 playlists and, figure out what the best second line is. I mean, yes, granted, you might tomorrow want a new second line, but pretty much let's finish this now. And I kind of use that as a mantra for my whole production philosophy, which is just, do it now. Don't wait. Don't sift later. Let's have the top playlist represent what, if we were to be done right now, this should be great. So
I like that. I think that's a great way to work. It certainly leaves room for creating more music sooner because you're not still working on the one from yesterday.
You can always go back with this Pro Tools playlist thing, but, do you really want to go back next Thursday and start comping the vocal again? I mean, nothing dreads me more than having to reapproach a song that, I was in it on Tuesday, but now it's Friday and everyone went home. I don't want to go through that vocal now.
Yeah, totally. Well, so I guess if you're doing that comping in the moment, you sort of as a group, you begin to feel like you're getting sick of it. So let's not keep working. Let's call it. As opposed to creating a whole ton of work for yourself to save later, burning somebody out and then just pretending like the last thing you just did, we're not going to use anyway. So
if there's I'm all about less takes and less singing. And, it's funny that one of my is it a pet peeve? But, when a singer goes in and I say, maybe I'll start a song and we'll have a little drum beat, we'll have an acoustic guitar. And I'm like, just go in there and cut a vocal quick. Just throw a vocal on there. And they're like, well, this is just the guide vocal, right? Maybe.
Yeah, sure, but don't sneeze in the middle of the take.
Yeah, but still, it's like, so many times I have used a lot of that vocal and there was no drums. They weren't even playing to like a band. So, but you just got to say, just take it. So, save everything, but don't wear out your musicians. You don't need to take 32 takes of the second verse. Just take as many as you need. If that means 2, then be done with it.
Okay, so you're listening. They do a take that feels pretty inspired. You hear a couple of things that could be different. How often do you just kind of say, let's go to those 2 lines and punch them versus like letting them just do another pass? In other words, do you do another pass when you feel like you already heard something that was pretty cool already?
Yeah, I want at least 2. There's just in case something's wrong. But no, as little as if it's just that one line we need, then we'll just punch a couple of those lines. Another thing I always do is you got to sing into the line and out of the line. Mm-hmm. So, if you're because that breath and the spacing between, line 3 and line 4, you're not going to sing it the same way unless you sing it all. So I always say, keep singing. Don't just stop for the word that you need. Right. But yeah, as a philosophy, the less singing, the better. And then, you can always come in tomorrow and take another second verse. I like doing that. Hey, can we beat the second verse? But when we're done, we're done.
I like it. So if you hear something that sounds pretty good, you don't have to try and beat it.
It's like, is it within the Melodyne realm of awesome? Yeah. Which is probably the answer to your next question.
All right, yeah. So let's talk about a favorite. So we're going to do hardware tool and then software tool, but we can do software tool first. So tell us about a favorite software tool.
Yeah, studio. I'm going to say Melodyne. Just if you don't have it or use it, and this could be auto-tune or waves tune in graphical mode. I've just never figured out how to use those. But basically, your vocal editing, pitch and timing software, just get into it and really study it, learn all the intricacies about it, because that can save your life. And you can do so much with Melodyne on a lead vocal that, I use it on guitars, on basses, on things that I need to stretch. I'd say half of what I use is timing, and that's getting into the lead vocal and really nudging the syllables around till it feels right. Who knows? When you're singing at home, you might have latency on, and you're singing to something it's not even recording the right way.
Right.
And all of a sudden your stuff sounds rushy or lazy and you're wondering what's going on. Well, Melodyne can fix that for you. You can also nudge in Pro Tools just by hand, which I also do. But I would just say my favorite software is Melodyne.
Okay. So quick question. Melodyne, when you use it, do you use it as a plugin instance in the Pro Tools session on the vocal track, or do you like to get everything out and open it up in Melodyne on its own?
I used to, when I was in LA, I had an assistant with a second Studio B, and I would have to use the standalone version. So I would consolidate 8 background vocal tracks and over iChat send them to the backroom computer, and then he would do them on the standalone, send me back a zip file. I'd open those, double check them all, export them, pull them into Pro Tools on a separate playlist, and be able to go back between, original vocal and Melodyne vocal. But once I started using Melodyne on the track in Pro Tools, it really, my world totally changed, because you can't really work on timing when you're just listening a cappella. I suppose you could have a rough mix in there too, but I never did that. So now I love having it on the track so that I can really focus on the timing, which is, pitch is great, but timing, man, can't say enough about it.
Are there any obstacles that somebody's going to be typical to run into as far as how to manage the transport, play, rewind, play from here, that sort of stuff when you're using it within Pro Tools, or is it pretty straightforward and simple?
The weird part of that is the undo. So when you undo, sometimes for some reason it undoes the last thing you did in Pro Tools, not the edit you just made in Melodyne. I don't understand that. That might be a bug. But so
Maybe the undo is a button on the Melodyne window or something like that.
Well, it does. Sometimes it does work though. So most of the times it does, but every once in a while you'll hit undo and it like separates some region on the kick drum that you did 3 minutes ago. And you're like, what just happened? So there's that. But, the tools are pretty simple. I definitely suggest using a trackball, like a Kensington Expert mouse, or one of those planks that Apple makes with the magic pad thing. Because right-clicking in Melodyne really gets your tools up fast, and but you still use the Pro Tools kind of space bar, stop and play situation.
Okay, cool. I like the idea of using it within Pro Tools because I think that whatever timing you're hearing, that's the timing you're going to end up with. So that probably does make it easier. All right, cool. So now, how about a favorite hardware tool, something physical that you like to have on sessions that just makes your sessions better?
I love to have an analog delay on an aux, on a Pro Tools kind of send. So I like to print a vocal, like an analog slap or like some regeneration. And I don't want it necessarily in time with, obviously you can put, echo farm or whatever on a track and MIDI tempo, 102 beats per minute and all that. But sometimes just having like an analog delay or an echoplex or a Roland, what's the Roland tape dealy deal?
Oh, the Space Echo 201?
Yeah, like having a Space Echo just on an analog out of Pro Tools and then an analog in back into Pro Tools, like, pick an output. Output 16 goes to the delay and input 16 comes in from the delay. And literally when you're done with your vocal, just take a pass, be wacky, be crazy, lay down some, spin the knobs, go do all that fun stuff. Even just to lay down a straight up slap, 120 milliseconds through some crappy Ibanez delay or like a pedal or something is going to give you a really cool flavor that you can't get in Pro Tools.
Plus it's locked in there for good if you record it to its own track.
It's printed, and printing is huge.
All right, cool. Great tip. Now let's talk about the business stuff for just one sec. Not everybody wants to do this for a hobby. Some people would like to do this for a living. What advice do you have as maybe a resource for the business side, maybe some online tool, or just advice in general that you want to give people?
Ooh, I wish I could have some. A lot of people ask me about this. And, I can just say that I'm thankful to have the greatest manager for the last 20 years, the same guy, Frank McDonough. And he handles so much for me and is such a great sounding board and a listening. I mean, he listens to the mix that I just did and says, hey, I love this, or that sounded a little weird. But not just a business manager, but also like, a confidant and friend. But finding someone like that can do the talking for you, that can do all the hard stuff like AFM contracts and, travel, and so that you can, stick your head into the studio and not be thinking about business and money, I guess. It's hard. You can't just like go get a producer manager. I know that, but I guess that would be, if you can, I highly suggest it.
What do you remember about the early years when you were recording in Minneapolis and you were just trying to make ends meet? I mean, it sounded like you were trading for alternate currency with the reggae bands too, so maybe it didn't matter so much.
I mean, honestly, a lot of it was just like uncomfortable discussions about $200,
Yeah.
So I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
But, now with PayPal and Venmo and all that, you could, just send them an invoice and, hopefully they pay it.
Or part of it is just hang in there until the day comes where you do get to cross paths with somebody who can help you take care of the business for you.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Now, how about an organizational online resource? You talked about Hightail, you talked about iMessaging, things like that. What do you want to share as far as keeping stuff organized? How do you keep your shit together using online tools?
I mean, I had a Drobo for a while, and that just kind of went south after about a year.
Drobo, is that Dropbox?
No, Drobo is like a one box with 6 hard drives in it, and it's its own proprietary software. There's another company called Synology that makes it. It's basically like RAID style backup of your system. So I tried that, but it just comes with so many strings attached, like carbon copy cloner. And I mean, I'm looking at my desktop right now. I've got about 10 hard drives on it. So, and I would say 8 out of 10 of those haven't changed in a year, but the other 2 are constantly, new stuff's being added and stuff. So I guess, the way I back up now, the Drobo was a problem, so I got rid of it. The way I back up now is I buy a 4T external SATA drive and I stick it in one of those USB toasters, and I back up the big drive that I've been working on for the last month, drag everything on there, or I carbon copy clone it, depending on how much data there is. Mm-hmm. And then I bring it home, and I have a copy of this 4T drive that has my last, 4 months of work on it. And then I have a separate copy at home in case there's fire or, theft or something. So at least I have it somewhere else. I use Dropbox mostly for client listening, like MP3 posting and mix posting, and Hightail for the big stuff because you can trace it. I really like to see your file has been downloaded at 12:23 p.m. by this guy, and then it got there.
Yeah. Do you have to keep files secure online? Are you working on projects where, things you can't risk them getting shared, for example? And is there a tip there that you want to share?
Lidge, I wish.
All right, fair enough. All right.
But, no, I mean, sometimes I'll have a password protected folder, or I'll erase as soon as the project is done.
Right.
But
yeah.
a lot, these days it's like, let's get the music out there. I mean, no one's leaking. Right. I guess they are. But, I'm not working with like top 40.
Who was it that had their record delivered in an armored truck back in the 90s or the early 2000s? All right, cool. Well, and I guess Hightail, if you share that link, if it did get to the wrong people, it would just be registered. You'd see who downloaded it when too. So I guess that would, but really, I think it's a non-issue these days.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's see, where are we next? Last 2 questions are hypothetical. This one is, imagine you're starting over again, or you're giving advice to somebody who is starting over. Going to a new town, you need a simple setup to get started recording. You got to find musicians to record and work with, and you got to make ends meet. What advice would you have for those 3 things? Gear, people, money.
Yeah, I mean, gear, it's like you got to buy a laptop and a UA Apollo or something, and a Pro Tools subscription and a basic setup of plugins. And you just need a couple mics. I don't know, SM58, 57, doesn't really matter. Just as long as it's not harsh. Something that is, that you can sing through and that you can put in front of an acoustic guitar. And then in terms of meeting people, I mean, in Minneapolis, there's a bunch of music schools here. I call them Pro Tools schools, but there's usually a great resource for finding young musicians who want to record, who need to record, who want to collaborate at these. They're not like Berklee School of Music, but, there's places probably in Nashville even where there's, and you just go hang out there, see who's there, go to the student recitals and meet that drummer who's amazing and 19 and doesn't know anyone, and then just start making friends with them. And, hey, do you have a band? I'd love to record you. Let's try it. So maybe something like that.
Yeah. How about paying some bills initially when you're getting started with something? Do you have any kids? Are you giving this advice yourself?
Yeah, I have a child. So I don't know, paying bills is tough. I mean, for me, it was always gigging. So I had a studio, but I was also in bands. And that doesn't mean just, your cool indie band. I'm talking about weddings and bar mitzvahs and cover material and, out in the suburbs, and just get in a band and make $100 a night and take it from there.
Good advice. Just be willing to work. Okay. So here's the last one, John. We're going to take the studio Wayback Machine, go back. You're going to go back to maybe Boston and find young John Fields. Tap yourself on the shoulder. You turn around. What are you doing here, older John Fields? And you say, well, I've come to give you this bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you give yourself?
That's impossible, Lidge. Impossible. But I mean, we didn't have the internet. We couldn't really research recording studios. I mean, look, I read Beatle books. That's as close as I could get to like learning what to do in the recording studio. So, what I missed out was, I mean, if there were books like on recording, I didn't read them.
Yeah.
And I wish I did, because I wish I had a little more of an electronics background. I was like a computer guy, like with my Apple II and all, but no, I didn't know about phasing or why, flipping the under snare makes it sound fatter. All those things. It took until I met people along the way.
Like the phase on the overheads being out of phase.
Just like, why does that even matter? And I realized now, how come I didn't, just such a simple thing to know then, and to recognize when it's wrong, that, I wish I had known that when I was a teenager.
Well, I guess when you're young too, you listen to music coming out of speakers and it's all cool, even when it's totally screwed up.
And that shit was probably out of phase too. So.
Well, John, thanks so much for being on Recording Studio Rockstars with us. It's been a blast listening to you tell stories and share, your thoughts on recording. Let our listeners know how they can find out more about you. How can they go follow you or get in touch with you if they need to make their next best hit record?
You can check out, just search my name on the internet, and probably the first thing that comes up is going to be my manager's website. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter and all that under the name Strawberrius.
Okay,
and that's how you can get in touch with me.
Would you like to suggest one record for people to go listen to right now?
Wow. I've been on an XTC tip lately. So, if you don't know about XTC Skylarking, which came out in 1986 and was produced by Todd Rundgren, by all means, study that, and let's talk about it.
Okay, groovy. We'll include a link in the show notes. John, thanks so much, man. It's been a blast hanging out with you. I look forward to meeting you in person.
Thanks, Lidge.
We'll see you around the hop stop.
Yeah.
Groovy, man.
Cool,
Take
man.
care.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.